Morning, guys. Yeah, my introduction is really unique there, so I'll try and kind of up it from here on out. So I am going to talk about, I think most people are not exactly maybe mindful enough about how Google is shifting to a mobile-first index and what that actually means. I think a lot of us have been trained for years on how to optimize for websites, when I think actually the opportunity is shifting to other channels and ways in which people consume content on the internet. I think that's going to change the job spec for what an SEO really is in the next few years, really. And I'm going to be going to go through the mechanics of that and what that really means. So yeah, there's a picture of me 4 years ago before I started my business when I didn't have any grey hairs. I've lost some of my baby face since. Obviously, we run as Kaizen the best agency in the world. We're better than all the rest. We specialize in content marketing predominantly. About 80% of our output is doing visual content campaigns for kind of finance, travel and retail brands. And yeah, we're pretty good at it. So I'm going to be going through stats, I'm going to be going through practical things, I'm going to be going through theoretical things, so I think it's useful for me to share a link to the slides now. You can see it on the website at kaizen.vi/mobile-first-SEO. I will mention that again at the end, and I will also tweet it in a bit too. So yeah, so the first thing I want to talk about is how people actually consume the internet now. Wired, a number of years ago, did this piece which kind of theorized how when people use the internet, the consumption of it to websites will actually be kind of steadily going in decline. And we see this now in terms of how actually people interact on the web. Websites are seeing a smaller proportion of the internet's overall traffic as more people now actually consume things like video and actually use applications on their mobile devices to access content on the internet. And I think that's the shift we have to recognize here, that I'm going to kind of put it out there that I think websites are going to kind of become slowly extinct over the next 5 to 10 years and actually will consume content in different devices completely. And with this, I'm not saying that the internet as a thing is dying off. That's obviously ridiculous. It is growing at a huge rate, and we're continuously seeing the shift of that with more and more people using it. But the way in which internet consumption is out there has changed considerably. A far-flung vision from what Tim Berners-Lee set out when he did his little horrible desktop computer in the early 90s and made the World Wide Web. And I'm going to kind of go through this, and most people in here, we already know, mobile, more people are using it than desktop. That's the fact. But what you might not realize is actually how people consume the internet on their mobile device. People spend the majority of the time on their mobile device when using the internet within an application and not a browser. And when you bear that in mind, it's actually quite surprising. I mean, yes, for me, I spend 7.5 hours of my day using a desktop computer every day and definitely not on my mobile. But when I am a mobile, and all of you here today, I doubt you're going to be spending so much time on Chrome. You're going to be spending it with a mobile device on applications. So when you look at websites only represent 10% of time people are spending on mobile devices connected to the internet, that kind of shows where the focus is slightly going the wrong way. And the reason for this is that mobile apps just provide a better user experience all around. They're faster, they're easier to work with, they are designed for a special purpose. There is content loaded locally on your device that you can do things with or without the internet, but when you get internet connection, it will push it out there. People prefer them as an experience overall. And BuzzFeed is a great example of this. Huge content publisher. When they had a look at how their content is actually consumed on the internet, only 23% of it is actually by people going onto their website. They're seeing the majority of the engagement of their content on platforms like Snapchat and Facebook, and SEO only represents an even tinier portion of that. So the content is being consumed elsewhere, especially within mobile devices. So I'll give you an example, Snapchat. Today I logged on to the Snapchat website for the first time. It is actually like a corporate website selling you your own geo filters that you can make for events, Who has ever been on the Tinder website? There's an app also for kids called Musical.ly where you can kind of mine music videos. It's used by hundreds of millions of teenagers. It's an app-only experience, Consumption to people isn't on websites now, and it won't be even more so in the future. And Google has had to kind of bear this in mind and has been radically adapting its search journey to kind of be focused on mobile first. And it's much more than we're looking at how websites render on this page and that page. It's actually reflecting how people use the internet today, because they see more searches now on mobile than desktop worldwide. And as a result of that, they've started to adapt this search journey. And probably one example of that, and I'm going to be going through multiple, is the way in which it's causing organic traffic for websites to be progressively reduced. And the reason that's happening is because of things like this. So app indexing, it is now possible, if you have an application, to actually get the whole library of content within that application indexed the same way that your website would be. And you can see that in the cases of here, the Yelp app. If you do a search for a local restaurant and you have the Yelp app installed and you click on a link, it opens up the page within the Yelp application rather than sending you to the website itself. Therefore, the preference is no website, go straight into the application there and thereabouts. And Google's expanding that. I'm going to talk a little bit how you can kind of get these results in a bit. So I'm going to go through these 4 areas which I think are kind of close to what represents, what Google's considering from a mobile first index point of view. So app indexing, site speed, Google AMP, and also voice search. And voice search, the first thing that I'm going to be talking about basically, and how that relates to mobile. So the first thing I want to talk about is Siri and OK Google. Now, I don't know about your experience, but I find Siri is shit. It is one of the most frustrating experiences I've ever had with using some sort of artificial intelligence product. And I think, voice search as a result has become a bit of a joke because of the fact that, we're sold down this path that, what Siri's going to do is find out where you are and give you a contextual reminder when you arrive to a destination and pop it up. And it's just going to make your life so much more convenient. That to me sounds fantastic. But whenever I use Siri, I don't get this little notification on the left, remind me to do this when I get home, and then it just magically happens. I actually have more of a conversation like this. Hey Siri, remind me to do that thing at the weekend. And it'll go, okay, when do you want to be reminded? I want to be reminded on Saturday. Oh, what? When do you want to be reminded about? And Siri just gets confused, and then it reminds me of the word what within the weekend. This sort of experience is what everyone has had with products like Siri and OK Google as well, and it actually is not fulfilling the request. And it would have been quicker for me to actually do it myself rather than actually ask Siri to do it. So, what people want out of voice search is, they want to take things that take 5 to 10 minutes, in usual means, but actually the voice artificial intelligence product can actually make it much quicker for them. This is a study that Google did looking at what people want out of voice search. And it's no surprise, people just want to sit on their ass, order pizza, have the remote handed to them, and then, like I did yesterday, I took someone's bag home from a race that wasn't mine. I just wanted to find my keys to get in the house. It would have been useful to have a useful version of Siri to tell me that I actually left my keys 2 miles away down the road. And that's what people want out of voice search, artificial intelligence products. So when you look at how we're getting there and how we're actually starting to achieve that goal of what people actually want out of it, artificial intelligence at the moment is kind of split into 2 categories. You've kind of got narrow AI, which is on the left. These are kind of artificial intelligence products where you make a request, and if it has the feature available, it will serve upon it, so it will do an answer or an action. And on the far right-hand side, we have deep AI, which is basically the most biggest category of that is machine learning. Google being the kingpins of machine learning. Will Critchlow is going to talk about it a little bit later too, of this idea of making a artificial intelligence product watch something, learn from it, be trained itself in that action, and then do it. It's like learning to ride a bike, basically, versus talking to a kind of automated teleservice on the phone. And most of the opportunity for marketers right now lies in these personal assistant products. And, as I said, the problem is that most of them are a bit of a joke at the moment. But for me, we are starting to see the emergence of this technology starting to become actually practically useful. If you don't have an Amazon Echo device, then you are missing out on an important component of your lives. I can switch the lights on in my bedroom on and off with my voice. My girlfriend thinks it's absolutely ridiculous, but I get such sick satisfaction of actually being able to do it when it works. And there's no surprise that the Echo devices have become the biggest selling products on Amazon, especially last year, and they've sold over 5 million devices because the satisfaction and actually the ability to understand your voice and act upon it is so much better. Because where Echo's getting it really right is that it's designed around performing actions and not answering who's the Queen of England. So that, to recap, is the problem with voice search today. When you use something like OK Google, what you're doing is you're saying a word or a sentence, that voice recording gets translated through an API and it gets translated into text. It just gets inputted into the search box like normal, and the result comes out and it just reads it off the page. You know, to me as an experience, that is not much different from just typing. It is quicker for me to type "Who is the Queen of England" than ask OK Google or Siri 6 times to actually get the answer itself. And Google's new Assistant product and Alexa are designed around that opposite experience of actually performing upon actions. You know, I can ask Alexa through the Pizza Hut skill or the Domino's pizza skill to actually get me a pizza delivered to my door, and then it does it for me. That is a completely different experience and actually adds value because it saves me 5 to 10 minutes. And you can see how people use Echo devices that this matches up quite nicely with the Google survey that was done 4 years ago that I showed you a minute ago. People are using it to turn their lights off and on. They're using it to read the news, play a song, and actually perform actions rather than ask it questions. So Google has paid attention to this. You know, you may have seen in the past few months there's been the emergence of the Google Home product that's now available in the UK market. And, you know, I think Google has a way to go with this product. You know, Alexa's Echo devices and the Alexa AI is still, in my view, far ahead of where Google needs to be on this. They have a lot of technology in terms of how they can actually beat Amazon, but they're not quite there yet. So the vision for Google in this, you know, they've kind of said that they were looking to build this Star Trek style computer. And if you don't get the reference, well, basically in Star Trek, there's a computer which you'd ask a question, it would give you an answer, and sometimes it would give you the answer to the question before you even knew what it was. And that's quite an exciting vision, and I think Google is starting to play catch up with this, but Alexa is still quite far ahead. But there are other areas in which Google is making massive leaps and gains. You know, Google are known as the kingpins of machine learning, and they have invested in this heavily, and I think it's quite exciting when you can take a look at how artificial intelligence products in other way could be applied to the search journey. And the main example of that is a company that they bought called DeepMind a few years ago. So I'm a massive video game nerd, you know, and this to me is a really exciting test that they did. So they got the DeepMind AI to actually watch videos on YouTube, which sounds like a dream job, of 49 different video games being played. And that's all it taught the AI to do, and then it dropped the AI into each of those video games. So these are all games from the 80s. And it then spent time learning itself how to play those games. And in the test that they did, they actually seen the AI beat humans at the games 23 times out of the 49 total games that are available. So an example you see is Breakout. So if you've played Breakout before, if you haven't, basic idea is paddle, ball, and what you've got to do is hit the ball to the bricks, and the bricks slowly disappear. But if anyone has actually played this game before, you know that there's a trick. If you're able to get the ball up along the left-hand side here and get the ball bouncing on top, it can progressively make each of the bricks disappear much faster. And it only took the AI 4 hours to learn that trick and basically beat the game. And that is just an example of learning a training set and then applying it and doing it again and again. And they took this further, so they did a huge live streaming tournament last year around the whole traditional board game you have in China called Go. And they actually did a classic kind of chess versus computers, human versus computer kind of setup where, you know, Go is an incredibly complex game. It is very traditional as well, and there's not many people who proclaim themselves as world players within it. And the AI actually beat the world's best player at Go at the time, Lee Sedol, 4-1 when playing it through. So, you know, Google's products in home, it's a bit shit at the minute, but it's actually, they've got so much technology within their arsenal where you can see that it kind of goes with this. But I guess the point that I'm trying to make here is that how do you actually optimize for it? So as I mentioned, you know, when it comes to artificial intelligence, most of the opportunity for marketers at the minute lies in the narrow AI side of the spectrum. And you kind of got two categories of that. So there's optimizing for answers and there's optimizing for actions. Now, I think as SEOs, the thing that we stick to is this side over here, you know, answers, answers, answers. But I've tried to make the case to you here that actually the value moving forward is going to be in actions. Now, I'll walk through both, but I think you need to kind of make sure that you have the focus on the actions and not necessarily the answers. So how do you optimize for answers? Well, when it comes to optimizing for answers, when you ask, okay, Google or Google Assistant a question, it's basically reading out the featured snippet. So this is actually a strategy for how you gain rankings for featured snippets, the kind of infamous, now known as position 0. So, you know, I'm going to walk you through how I did this for one of the clients that I have, which is called Vonage. So Vonage are a provider of internet phones, basically, to businesses. And the strategy for me is actually relatively straightforward. You know, this should be content that good SEO people are actually doing already, which is basically, first, you get your product or your service. So in their case, VoIP. you use a tool like keywordtool.io, which scrapes Google Suggests to actually understand what are all the who, what, where, how, why, and when questions that relate to your product or niche. So you can see here for VoIP, the keywordtool.io actually found 300 different variants of those questions. And then from there, the strategy is about creating content that actually serves to answer that question. So the way in which I did this for Vonage is I created a beginner's guide to VoIP. So we did all the data, the research, the design, and the copywriting in-house. We built the HTML, and then we integrated it on their site. But the main thing is here is that for every question, we made sure it was visible in a paragraph on the page, and we served a short, snippy answer to serve it. But in terms of how you get featured snippets, it's not through structured data. It's not some sort of magical tag that you can add to the site. There's actually a kind of mathematical, psychological element in actually how you get these featured snippet rankings. So SEMrush partnered up with AJ Gregorich, who's to actually look at 1.2 million different featured snippets and to analyze when you look at the different varieties of questions, so like who, what, where, why, when, and how, what are the patterns that recur between them so that you can use this as a bit of a cheat sheet for how you should write your featured snippet. So if you've got a question like, what are internet phones? You can see that 95% of the time, questions that begin with what have a paragraph-based answer. Or alternatively, if it's a which style question, it's usually the answers within a table, or how, it's usually a list. So you can use that as a starting point. So if I want to optimize for what is an internet phone, I can use this as a bit of a cheat sheet to know if the way I structure the answer should be in a table, list, or paragraph. And then on the right-hand side, I can understand better about the formatting. How long should that word sentence be? How many kind of different kind of elements should there be within it? So, you know, this is obviously kind of like an analysis of 1.2 million featured snippets. You know, you are after going to do your homework here and actually look at how, if there's a feature snippet existing already, understanding how that answer is actually structured in order to then replicate it. Typical competitor analysis stuff, really. But I found this is a great way of using a cheat sheet of how you can actually land those featured snippets. And you can see an example of it all in action here. So I did the keyword research for the term. Can VoIP numbers receive texts? I designed a page that actually succinctly answered that question. I structured it in the same way as that SEMrush guide, and then we gained the answer for the featured snippet here. So, you know, it took me, to be fair, 7 times to get Google Assistant to actually understand me when I asked this question. But it is real. You can try it for yourselves. And you can see there essentially a perfect example of optimizing for voice search as a result of a question, gaining a featured snippet, and then getting it there. And that's the basic strategy to rinse and repeat to optimize for answers. So what about actions? So optimizing for actions ties back to app indexing and deep linking. So there's a basic philosophy here that you need to have, and kind of structure you need to have in place to actually make it happen. So the first thing is an API. So I'll give you an example of a client I have called Music Match. So Music Match are the world's largest provider of licensed lyrics to every single kind of music company that you can think out there. And the first thing that they did was actually invest in building their database of lyrics and making it available through an API. The second thing they did was build their application that serves that answer so people can navigate for different lyrics. And the third thing they did was build their website. And they did that because they've seen their API as a potential business model for them. They can license out these lyrics to all these different businesses out there and also offer it as integration to other developers, essentially securing them organic visibility for free. So as a result of that, their SEO strategy is actually getting the API and making it available and getting it embedded with all these different third-party publishers, and that's how they're gaining visibility for their brand and gaining traffic and revenue. And that, in its core, also relates to what they're doing now, which is building Alexa skills and also Google Play skills to read out the lyrics from songs, because they all tie back into APIs. So in terms of app indexing, you got to understand that a little bit better first of how you get it. So first thing you need in place is app. Second thing is API. And in terms of how app indexing actually works and how you can integrate it and get these sort of results, you know, you need to be, there's different kind of philosophies you need to follow for both iOS and for Android. And the other thing that's interesting about app indexing is that at the moment, if you don't have the application installed, it actually just says install this app. But what we're starting to see now on Android devices is Google is making it available for developers, whether you have the app installed or not, it would actually stream the page from an app. So it'll actually take the app and stream it. So when you factor those two things in mind, it's potentially a website killer all around because it makes the website completely irrelevant for search queries that can be answered with an app-based experience because people can just stream the content directly from it. So in terms of how app indexing works, the first thing in principle here, you need to make sure that both your app and your website follows a similar URL structure and that it's matched between the app and within the website. And the second thing you've got to do is look at the relevant API documentation or SDK documentation in the case of iOS and follow that through to make sure the application is eligible to be indexed within Google Search. And essentially you can register your application within Google Search Console and then you can actually then monitor the amount of clicks that are being directed to the application view rather than the website itself. There's a whole technical process that I could go through here. I think it's more valuable for you actually to spend time looking at the developer's guide on the Google website and the actual Apple one itself that talks through how you add support for HTTP URLs within the app and then how you actually register it and test it within Google Search Console to actually get it eligible for there. So in terms of how the artificial intelligence products interact with the application itself, the first things with, so this is OK Google, because OK Google is selling a lot of phones rather than Google Assistant. Essentially, the only ability you can do for OK Google right now is the search functionality. So you can say, search for hotels in Maui on the TripAdvisor application. And you can make OK Google talk to your application. So if someone does a search, it will actually open up the application page within itself rather than sending you to a Google search query relating to your brand. And in the case of Siri, it's actually built around actions. It isn't actually built around search. So if you have an application that lets you do any of these functionalities over here, you can integrate your app within Siri, and then it will make it eligible for when users do queries and then show it through. So what you can see from that is, ironically, it's quite restrictive. So in terms of actually optimizing for Siri and OK Google, it's actually quite a limited thing based on transactions and also functionality. But where it gets interesting is actually in smart devices. Google's new Home product, which has Google Assistant and some newer Android devices, and also essentially through Alexa and the Echo devices, it's actually quite open. Any brand can build a skill and make it eligible to be listed and integrated within those devices. So you can see here, it's a very technical explanation, but it actually kind of breaks down how an Amazon Alexa skill works. And Google Assistant skills work in broadly the same way. But basically, if you look at the top left over here, so a customer will ask a question or a skill. So I might say, Alexa, please open the National Rail app. Please open the National Rail skill and tell me if my train back to London today is going to be delayed. That query gets recorded, so everything you say on Alexa is recorded to an MP3 file, and then that gets translated through an API, puts it into text. That text then gets sent to the server of your skill. It will check, it will break down the things, so it will go, right, National Rail, delays, London. It will break those three things down. It will check the data, check the API of the National Rail API, and it will then give me the query back of whether or not the delay is yes or no. It will then pass it back through to Alexa as text. Alexa will turn it into voice, and it will output it on the other end through Alexa saying it, or whether it comes up as a notification on the device itself. And that's how it kind of breaks down. And most Alexa skills, you can see actually a link there which actually walks through how you build an Alexa skill. And in the version of this presentation I have on SlideShare, it actually has a similar graph, like I said, for Google Assistant and how you can actually do the same for the Google Assistant product. So the thing is that might also be in your mind is that, you know, maybe Alexa skills are reserved to the cooler brands that I don't necessarily involve in. Now, I don't know about you, but gas and electricity, and I'm sorry if you work for a utility company, I worked at British Gas for 4 years, it ain't exciting, you know? It's important, but it ain't exciting. But actually, we're actually seeing some innovation here from EDF Energy, who thought, no, we're going to build an Alexa skill. And with EDF's Alexa skill, you can actually manage your energy account using your voice. Now, quite a boring prospect maybe, but it actually is a useful functionality and gives an example of how boring brands can actually take advantage of voice artificial intelligence APIs. Of course, the other thing you can do is also order a pizza, but you know, not everyone gets this opportunity to do this. Cool. So as I've kind of mentioned there in terms of the voice component of this presentation, you need to focus on voice actions and not necessarily answers. Answers is okay, don't get me wrong, but in terms of what people are using artificial intelligence products for voice, they want to do stuff. So the second thing I want to talk about in relation to the mobile index is site speed. Google confirmed about 2 months ago that site speed will be an important component of it. And the frustration I have is that actually when you look at the web as it stands today, is that it's extremely slow. So most people expect a web page to load in 2 seconds or less. And based on a study that me and my team did, the average retail site actually loads in 10 seconds. That's a huge gap between expectation and delivering upon reality. And it's a bit like the experience, if anyone has seen this film, Zootopia, where the sloth takes the photo and you're waiting frustratingly for it to actually happen. And slow loading websites are costing, and this is a study by Kissmetrics, are costing retailers up to 1.73 billion in lost sales every year. But the methodology is simple. If you have a faster site, your conversion rate increases and therefore you make more revenue. You know, that is such a clear business case to be investing in site speed. But I thought, okay, you know, let's give peace a chance. And I wanted to actually have a look at essentially how fast are the top 700 e-commerce sites in the UK. So I asked SimilarWeb, give me a list of, you know, all the major e-commerce sites in the country. I asked for 1,000. Turns out there's only about 700. The other 300 are like German sites and, you know, other ones that are just non-English. And I had a look to see how fast are these websites and also how well are they actually optimizing for speed. And the news is everyone's doing a shit job, I'm afraid, you know, except a handful. You can kind of see here the top 20 results. So these are the top 20, in my view, the sites that are doing the best in terms of speed optimization and also load time. So what I did is I looked at 4 different factors. So I ran all 700 e-commerce sites through the Google PageSpeed Insights API. I checked to see if they're using HTTP2. And also I looked at the homepage size and how quick it loads per megabyte. And then essentially I created a score and I weighted it for all 700 results. And you know, if any of you guys work for an e-commerce store, you're probably in here and you can see the actual full results on our website essentially. And you know, that's fine, that's interesting. TM Luna the best, but what does it actually mean? So when you look at PageSpeed Insights, I wanted to see across the board, you know, where are the actual sticking problems when it comes to site speed. So you can see here, and what sticks out to me is actually an image optimization. So 93% of the sites that I checked are coming up with an image optimization warning saying that they are not actually losslessly compressing their images for site speed. And then the second one, which surprises me, is minification. So actually stripping out all the white space within code within CSS, JavaScript, and HTML to actually make it more lean. Now, those are 2 things that can actually be automated. So to me, it's quite shocking that this remains a prevalent problem, and especially within images, you know, compressing for images is one of the biggest gains in terms of speed from my point of view. So you can kind of see there where everyone's kind of getting it wrong. And mobile, which is what we're talking about, you know, when you look at retailers and e-commerce stores optimization on mobile, the websites are typically worse for speed than they are on desktop. So there might have been some optimization work done on the desktop site, but mobile has been left out for pasture. On average, e-commerce sites are loading 8.5%, sorry, not loading, they are actually worse optimized for speed by 8.5% on mobile than they actually are on desktop, which is pretty appalling. And then when you look at how the average e-commerce homepage compares to the average page on the web, pages are actually on average about 24% larger. And you know, you can see here a breakdown of the typical web page and how images make up such a huge component of it. And yet 93% of sites aren't optimizing for that different pool. So as I mentioned, you know, minification and image optimization can actually be automated. Google has a free page speed module that can be installed on your server on the back end so that it will automatically minify content when it relates to CSS and JavaScript and images. And it will also turn on browser caching, which is the most recurring issue as a whole, as I shown earlier, to actually automate that, to actually take care of it itself. So easy win in my view. And outside of the basics, there's actually a number of interesting different speed technologies that have came about as a result of technology companies thinking the web's too slow. You know, one of the main reasons everyone's using applications now is because the web is too slow, and the web needs to do a better job of actually optimizing for speed as a whole. Otherwise, the web will become extinct from my point of view. So, you know, I've already mentioned instant apps, you know, that's replacing websites, but in terms of website technologies, we've got HTTP2 and obviously the Google AMP project. So in the case of HTTP2, essentially HTTP2 is still massively underutilized by the web, and the retailers that we looked at actually only about 14.5% of them use HTTP2, slightly better than the average of the web as a whole. But the problem is a lot of people don't know this technology, so I'll probably get some confused face from you guys. So to break it down, basically when you connect to a website in your browser, it's connecting to a server. And the way in which it's requesting that information is over the HTTP protocol. And the way that this has been done traditionally for the past 20 years is that a piece of information from your website is requested one step at a time. It's why you see things pop in, the logo, then the text, then the rest of the images, because one thing is being requested at a time. And that's quite a slow, inefficient process. It's like being at a restaurant and ordering each of your items for your meal through different interactions with the waiter. And HTTP2 is designed to eradicate that. It makes the requests for all the information it needs at once and then delivers it the second that it's loaded. It can result in much, much faster load times. So Cloudflare, which is one of the most popular CDNs in the world, and they turn this on for all of their customers, and they've seen a significant improvement in terms of load time. And that number is dramatic. When I've done this for my clients, we're talking more 10 to 15%. But of course, a lot of Cloudflare customers get this out of the box on smaller websites too. But it's a very valuable thing to actually enable. And the fact is, if you've done a server migration in the past 3 to 5 years, you have a HTTP2 module sitting within that server that's ready to be switched on. And I've actually written a guide which actually goes through 7 different steps about the due diligence you need to do to see whether or not you're ready for HTTP2 and how you can actually enable it. So you can see some basics there. HTTP2 is now supported by all major web browsers. It has been for a number of years. So most people use Chrome, and therefore most people have a HTTP2 browser enabled. If they don't, it falls back to HTTP1 anyway, so nobody loses. And as I said, you can see here 2 different server types, Apache and Nginx, and the operating system level it needs. And then the other pivotal thing is it's not really actually worth investing in this unless you have an SSL certificate on the site that's being served. So you don't actually need an SSL to have HTTP2 as a thing, but when you load a website in a browser, most of the time the website will only load in HTTP2 mode if it's also got an SSL certificate in place as well. So that's a kind of rule that Google Chrome has set, and a couple of the other browsers too. And as you can see, I've got a guide on the State of Digital, which actually kind of runs through this in 2,000 words or so you can actually look at how to do it yourself. So the other thing is Google AMP. So I'm going to take a kind of broad spectrum here that everyone knows what Google AMP is. I'm sorry if you don't, there's some basic reading there. But the thing that I want to highlight is its growth. So Google AMP now is used on 600 million different pages, and it's in use across 700,000 domains. And the thing about Google AMP is that, again, when it came out, it was just for publishers. But we've actually seen AMP expand into other territories. So if you have an e-commerce store now or a property listing website, you can actually, there is a AMP-specific specification that actually will walk through of how you can actually get your website indexed in kind of AMP mode. And you can see here an example for eBay. So eBay in July last year, doing this for a year now, actually started serving 8 million of their URLs in AMP mode. And as a result of that, they've been able to benefit from a huge increase in click-through rate because they're getting prominent listings of the fact that their content is preloaded. So there's an opportunity for e-commerce stores here to actually, if you don't have an app, at least you can make the experience slightly faster by looking at, potentially, first I would advise, small split test of potential number of URLs. eBay has billions of URLs, 8 million was just a split test for them. And as a result of that, seeing how it can have a positive impact for you. So very little basic example. This is a screenshot from what is now the old version of the Kaizen site compared to the AMP version, because we have Google AMP enabled on our site. And you can kind of see here actually how the number of requests goes significantly down. The load time goes from 4 seconds to 1 second, and the page size is actually a quarter of what it was. So it's quite a big impact. A lot of that is about cutting out the fluff. You can see here, this is a much more slimmed down version of the web page compared to all these flashy things here. So it's a valuable tool to look at, especially if you're in e-commerce or in property, because you can actually use it yourself now. The other thing that Google is seeing as of the fact that it is a success is they're now releasing essentially a new snippet of HTML that will check whether the page that someone is clicking on has an AMP version available as an alternative. So you can see a screenshot here on Cloudflare. If you click on that link will actually take you to the next page in AMP mode if it's available, essentially. So AMP is no longer restricted to just Google search results. It's becoming a form of internal link structure as well to actually serve up the next page in AMP. Google AMP, if you haven't looked at doing this, there's two kind of quick ways. If you have WordPress, there's an official WordPress plugin available. It does take a bit of tinkering around to get setting up. It can be integrated with Yoast SEO also, and there's also a separate plugin available to actually connect the two together. And then, of course, there's the official AMP website, which has just got a plethora of tips, types, and tutorials that look at all the different types of AMP code and give you demos in action of how it can be connected and enabled on the site. Cool. So, as I mentioned, we did a site speed study, so you can see on our website the full kind of study. It's like a 2,500 word article. I go through much more different types of site speed tactics that you can actually look at. I didn't want to bore you all to death for those here. So, on that kind of note, really, I've kind of gone through the 4 different areas of where I think the mobile first index and where mobile first SEO will be. In terms of how we as marketeers that work within SEO need to be mindful moving forward is actually looking at opportunities that sit outside of the website itself. So we need to be looking at how we can get the brand that we work with visible on the App Store, visible on the web, and also visible within voice, artificial intelligence products that all are primary components of the mobile first index. And all of that ties back to actually having an API in place, and that is pivotal. And you need to look at solutions now as an exercise of how you can actually encourage a brand to actually invest in an API and start utilizing it in order to get organic visibility elsewhere on the web. That's the end of my talk. Thanks very much, guys. And you can see a link to the slides just there. Thank you.
Thank you, Pete. I think it's interesting first observation that you talk about AMP when Jerry just described it as a bad solution to a bad problem.
Yeah, I agree with
one
that.
for over lunch, I guess.
Yeah.
Any questions? Any questions for Pete? Just into the, sorry.
Yeah.
The cheat sheet that you mentioned for the featured snippets, did you say that was on SEMrush?
Yeah, so there's actually a better breakdown on the Moz blog, actually. So SEMrush is the study, but the Moz blog actually has a better guide from it, and that's where the screenshot's from.
On the page speed, obviously you mentioned page speed insights. Is that the tool you use pretty religiously, or do you use any of those like Pingdom, or what's your favourite?
Page speed insights because of the API, because the API is free.
Yeah.
And don't get me wrong. I had like a site speed version, like dedicated presentation. I mentioned Pingdom as well. Pingdom is fine, and there's a tool called HTTP2 checker as well that can kind of quickly check it. Yeah. I mean, it's apples and oranges really.
Any more?
Nice as we like, straightforward.
Yes. Well, thank you very much, Pete.